So I cannot wait to introduce my next guest. I have wanted him on the show for a very, very long time, and now he is here, and we are talking about two movies that I love so much. It is critic Armond White from the National Review. Hello, good morning.
Hello, Amy. Nice to speak with you, and thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for coming on. Tell us what film you picked in our Battle of the Concert Films showdown.
Okay, the Battle of the Concert Films, like Battle of the Bands on old radio shows. I chose Prince's 1987 film Sign o' the Times, which is a concert movie based on his 2-disc album. And I think it's a wonderful film. I think it's a groundbreaking film. And I don't know anybody who's seen it who doesn't love it. But for those who haven't seen it, I want to spread the news that it's a great film and it deserves canonic status.
Yeah, it is a great film, and it is so hard to see. I was looking at the first time I saw Sign of the Times. They were showing it here in LA on the big screen. It's fantastic, and the rights seem to have gotten lost in the year since it came out. I mean, when Sign of the Times came out, it wasn't even that big of a hit. Like, we should talk about where it was in the arc of Prince's career. He had just made Under the Cherry Moon the year before. He had done Purple Rain 3 years before that with the same director, Albert Magnoli. His career was sort of going up and down. He was taking a switch in his sound. Sign of the Times was a new direction for him. He was thinking about going in a ton of different directions. And he wanted people to connect to the music. And so he made this amazing documentary, and it didn't do super well at the box office.
No. The film has an interesting history, which I should say is something that I cover in my new book. It's called New Position, The Prince Chronicles, which is available on Amazon. And in that book, I cover the arc of Prince's career, which I think is exceptional in the sense that he wasn't just a great musical artist, but he was a musical artist who had cinematic ambitions. And the book is divided into 3 parts. It's divided into his music, is divided into his movies, and it's divided into his music videos. And I think that's the arc of his creativity. Everybody knows he started out as a prodigy, as a teenage prodigy in the 1980s when he was signed to Warner Brothers, and he made many good albums. But his ambitions were larger than just music, so he wanted to make movies, and he wanted to make movies at the same time that the music video industry was just starting and just being accepted worldwide. And just to briefly review his history, his first film was, of course, Purple Rain in 1984, which is a feature film released by Warner Brothers and directed, as you said, by Albert Magnoli. It was a huge hit. It gave Prince extraordinary status. It was not only the #1 film in the country, it was the #1 music album in the country. It was the #1 song in the country simultaneously. And I don't think anyone since the Beatles had ever had that kind of achievement, but Prince had it. And Purple Rain is just it's a gas. It's a wonderful film still. It deserved the success that it won because it's so entertaining. And it's so meaningful to people who respond to Prince's music because it's sort of semi-autobiographical story about a young kid in Minneapolis who's struggling with his racial and sexual identity, and also his artistic identity, trying to find out who he is and what it is that he wants to express in his music, particularly his relationship with women and his relationship to sex. And it's all there in the music as well as in the story of Purple Rain. Purple Rain was a huge hit. He followed Purple Rain 2 years later in 1986 with a kind of misbegotten project called Under the Cherry Moon, which Prince hired, not Albert Magnoli, but one of the great music video directors of the era, a woman named Mary Lambert, who's probably best known for directing several of the Madonna music videos in the mid-1980s, like A Virgin.
And she quit fairly early on because from what I hear, Prince would hire directors to be directors, but he would kind of want to do everything himself.
Yes. And I guess that kind of interference actually is typical of Hollywood, but especially difficult when you have a genius like Prince who, as they say, knows what he wants, but may not be able to express what he wants to his collaborators.
Wait, I heard this rumor. I want to know if this is true. I heard that when he shot the video for When Doves Cry, he locked the director outside of the shoot and he made him read magazines. And he just did the whole thing himself.
That's a story I don't know. Doesn't surprise me. But but that was an interesting music video in itself. That kind of butterfly effect of the images doubling on each other. Prince's visual imagination is always interesting. I give him great credit, by the way, for hiring good directors. I guess now it's fashionable to say that he deserves some credit for hiring women directors too, like Mary Lambert, who actually her gender is irrelevant to the fact that she's a creative artist, and her videos are very good. Something happened, and I don't know what happened between Mary Lambert and Prince during the making of Under the Cherry Moon, but I think a couple of her sequences survive in the finished film, but Prince took it over, and that film has its supporters. I'm not really one of them. I think it's a kind of misbegotten project where the story about an American artist going to Paris and falling in love with the country and falling in love with women there, particularly one played by Kristen Scott Thomas. I think it's full of Prince's own confusions and anxieties, once again, as always, about sex and race.
And it's an interesting look, I think, at male vanity, too, because of the way that Prince shoots himself and the way he imagines that he walks into a room and he's clearly the most beautiful thing in that room.
Vanity? Prince?
Who would ever have guessed it? But yeah, he plays this basically male courtesan gigolo who romances his way through the south of France. And he shoots himself like a silent film icon. You watch him and you imagine he's thinking like, I am Theda Bara.
Fascinating. And also a fascinating thing to behold in the mid-1980s, at the same time where from England you have all kinds of gender crossing and gender bursting music stars. And Prince was equal to any of those kinds of innovations and transgressions himself. And it's all there in Under the Cherry Moon. It's interesting, but I don't think it ever really works. But it's always fascinating, actually, that intersection between personality, sex and race, America and Europe. The film's full of that, but I think it ultimately fails. And one reason it fails, I've always, and in the book, in New Position, I propose that Prince knew it was a failure artistically, as it also was at the box office, because he didn't release a soundtrack album for Under the Cherry Moon. Instead, he went to the studio and he recorded songs that are not in the movie, but each song that he recorded seems to take up the themes of the movie, but takes them on in personal ways and really clever and original ways. And that album was reduced under a different title. It was released under a different title, not as Under the Cherry Moon, but as Parade, which happens to be my favorite Prince album. And I sometimes think that I like it above the others because he reworked the themes of the movie in such an original way that it speaks to me differently from the other Prince albums. It's as if there's a story on the album that's not the same story as in the movie, but you can follow it song by song. It starts with a track called Christopher Tracy's Parade, named after the character of Under the Cherry Moon that he plays. And it ends with a kind of funereal elegy called Sometimes It Snows in April, which alludes to the narrative arc of the movie itself, but is so much more moving than anything that happens in the movie. And then in between, you have one great Prince song after another, no two of them alike. And it's as if he knew that the movie Under the Cherry Moon wasn't satisfactory, but he has these ideas, and he has an urge to express these ideas, to give them expression in an original way that he didn't quite know how to do on film, but he certainly knew how to do it in music. The Parade album, by the way, is the album that gave the world the single Kiss, the Magnificent Kiss, which I would propose is Prince's greatest single track of all time.
Oh, it's so tough. I feel like the Prince's greatest single is whatever the single is that I'm currently listening to.
that you're listening to at the moment. Okay. But
it's so
hard to get around. It's hard to get around Kiss. But you're right. I agree with you basically, because Kiss is followed by do you know the album Parade?
Not that well, honestly. Like, I have been a Prince dilettante who's trying to get more into Prince in the last few years, because I have to admit, and this makes me feel sort of bad saying it out loud, but once he got into more esoteric sounds, I couldn't connect to it that much. I have such a single-oriented brain, and I feel like I missed out on a lot of Prince that I need to like go back as an adult and revisit.
Well, God knows there sure is a lot to go
There's
to go
so
back
much.
over.
I mean, like
But
his from what I hear, his vault that I guess is going to be under the control of his sister right now, his one that he has it in Minnesota.
yeah,
He might have something like 40 or 50 never seen music videos that he directed of himself. Like his directorial ambition is in part locked away in Minnesota, and we don't know if we're ever going to get to see it.
yes. Well, I have my own attitude towards all of that. I think artists know when they do something that's really good and that people really need to hear. And I think if he locked it in a vault, there's probably a reason. Although Prince has, he has something like, well, he has perfect pitch as a musician. Doesn't always have perfect pitch as a video maker or a filmmaker. I think when he had something really good, he wanted people to see it, and so
but people have not gotten to see.
Though, about the album Parade, which you have to get to the album Parade. It's a great thing, and as magnificent as Kiss is immediately followed on the album by Another Lover, Hole in Your Head, which is just one of the most magnificent R&B tracks ever made, back to back. I guarantee you, after listening to Kiss and then Another Lover, Hole in Your Head, you won't argue that the Parade album is just about unbeatable. anyway, so
Sign of the Times, when that comes out, how important is Sign of the Times to him, given that Cherry Moon was questionably received? Then he does this concert doc, and it actually makes even less money than Under the Cherry Moon. Ooh.
Yeah, well, but the money doesn't really matter. The important thing is that after making Under the Cherry Moon, after making Parade, Prince had nonstop creativity, and he still apparently wanted to keep up the cinematic success that he had with Purple Rain. And so apparently, among the many ideas that he's working on at the same time, one of them was to do a concert film. And the story is that he embarked on the concert film that we know of as Sign of the Times, and that it was a mess. But Prince, being the clever pop artist that he is, always working with different music video directors, he signed on with a production company called Propaganda. And the Propaganda production company, which I think works out of L.A. mostly, was headed by a guy named Simon Fields. And Simon Fields was responsible through Propaganda for many of the best American music videos of the period. And working with Simon Fields, Prince remade the mess of a concert film that he had in the studios in Minneapolis. So
right, because he had first tried to shoot it in Rotterdam, I believe, and he just wasn't happy with the footage at all.
Concert footage was shot in Europe, but what he had assembled, he wasn't pleased with. So
he basically was able to like go back to his home turf and shoot with. I mean, Minneapolis loves him in a way that I don't know if any town has that much of a relationship with their local pop star. I mean, Graceland? I'm trying to think of like any area of the world that has their hometown hero, and there's such a connection between them that he would want to shoot this here, that he always wanted to keep living there, and to go home and to shoot that here with the crazy crowd who always worships him. One of my friends who grew up in Minneapolis said that like she would go see him play in Minneapolis, and at the end of every concert, he'd be like, "Come back to my house," and just like the people of Minneapolis would go back to Prince's house, and he would just keep playing for them there.
Yeah, I can imagine it. I'm from Detroit, and as a Detroiter, we don't take second place to our love of hometown musicians to any town, because we're Motown. But I understand the love. I understand
I'm from Michigan.
The hometown love.
I'm from Lansing, Michigan. We don't have that much cool stuff from us.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Michigan State.
Yeah, but my parents went there.
But so it's interesting though that he shot this footage in Europe, the concert footage, but he wasn't satisfied with the assemblage that he had. So he remakes the film, still working with Simon Fields and the Propaganda people, and then also bringing back Albert Magnoli. And so the result is a concert film, the concert film that we know, and it's kind of in cinematic terms, it's sort of like one of the super productions of Hollywood in the great studio days. Something like it's kind of analogous, I would say, to Gone with the Wind, in the sense that Gone with the Wind has a number of directors, but if you want to talk about it in standard critical terms, which would be in auteur terms, in terms of the author of it, in terms of whose vision it is, you can't really say that Gone with the Wind is the vision of George Cukor or of what's that guy's name, Victor Fleming. It's actually the vision of the producer who hired them all, David O. Selznick. And in that sense, that's the kind of movie that Sign of the Times is. It's got Albert Magnoli directing things. It's got Simon Fields and his people directing things. It's got Prince directing things. But Prince is the overarching intelligence and vision in that movie. Prince is the auteur of Sign of the Times. But it comes from this very interestingly Hollywood-like mixed experiment of many different hands creating it. Yeah. But it's got a singular drive, a singular vision as a result, and that vision is Prince's. And that's why I every time I see it, I feel assured that it's one of the great movie musicals.
You know what I find so interesting about this is that when I think of Prince, even though he had groups like the New Power Generation, I think of Prince as a solo artist. To me, just first and foremost, and especially when we think about him as a strong-willed auteur, like when he would go on tour, even with his bands, he would micromanage them down to what they wore to the breakfast table. He wanted to make sure they looked cool, even when they're at the hotel eating like porridge. And he directed his life, and he directed his entire career, I feel like. And yet, when you really watch Sign of the Times, it is such a generous film. And that's what I always find so striking about it, is he's trying to make a superstar out of his dancer Kat. He's like pushing her to the front of the screen. He's like really highlighting everything she's doing. He gives everybody in the band a solo. He's so generous with his time that you would think a guy who had that much control over himself and his own image and what he wanted to project to the world would make it totally all about him. And yet he tries so much to share the spotlight with everybody. And I always find that so surprising, because it's not the first thing I think of is like Prince, the generous band leader.
Well, he is a band leader, and he's also a student of popular culture. So he had to have learned something from the band leaders who came before him, Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, particularly I would say James Brown, wherein you have to have a strong hand, or else everything will get out of hand. But even though you have a strong hand, you know who your stars are, you know who your allies are, and you want the good musicians to shine, because it is a group project. But you want good artists to shine. He loved talent, apparently, and so he showcases the talent in Sign of the Times too.
Yeah, I mean, if you find somebody like a Sheila E., if you find like a Sheila E., if you find a woman who is beautiful and charismatic and can drum, like who can drum like the hell out of a drum, you put that girl front and forward. Like that is a find to find someone like Sheila E.
Well, yeah. One of the remarkable things about Sign of the Times, and one thing that I insist makes it equal to the great Hollywood movie musicals, is that Prince showcased talent in the very same way that the producer Arthur Freed did at MGM, in the very same way that artists like Gene Kelly and Stanley Donen and Vincent Minnelli would do when they made movies. Think about the way that Minnelli and Kelly and Donen used Sid Charisse. And it's not any different from the way Prince uses Cat Glover and the way he uses Sheila E. The climax of the movie, the long performance of "It's Gonna Be a Beautiful Night." It's I guess the word for that is fabulous, and fabulous largely because of the way the women are showcased. And Prince is a showman. He has a showman's instincts, and he showcases Sheila E. and Cat Glover as showgirls, and they've got the goods.
Yeah, Cat's even wearing like that can-can
They can
skirt.
drum. they can sing, they can rap, they can really dance, and he shows them off spectacularly. And the movie it goes into the stratosphere at that point.
I also love what he seems to be doing with all of the nerdy white talented people who are in his band. Like he's got like a couple nerdy white guys, you know, someone on like trumpet, I think. I forget he's playing the keyboards, another one. He's like, "You're a nerdy white guy. I'm going to put you in a black cloak. I don't know. That'll make you look sort of cooler. You're a nerdy white guy. I'm going to give you a red stethoscope. I don't know. You're going to play with a red stethoscope on. It's going to make you look cool. I don't know why."
Well, the reason why is because Prince is from the United States of America, and he understands about mixed cultures, mixed races, mixed ideologies, and he brings them all together. Not unlike another historic band leader, Sly Stone, Sylvester Stewart. It's America. You have to bring together. You have to bring people of different backgrounds together. That's what the country always is. And it's apparent in Sign of the Times. It's apparent in the way Prince uses his band, the way he indulges different ethnicities, different sexualities, and he brings all of that together without making a big point of it, just making you see it and making you enjoy it, making you enjoy the variety.
You know, there was a moment actually rewatching Sign of the Times this week where I took a look at the band and everybody on it and how much fun everybody was having. And I thought, oh, this looks like that scene in La La Land where Damien Chazelle is making fun of John Legend's band. It looks just like that, except this is actually really good music. And what's so wrong with this?
Oh, now you ruined my high. Oh yeah, La La Land. Okay, I get you. Yes, I understand what you're saying, and I agree with it too. It's simply the difference between talent and non-talent, frankly. I don't suspect that Damien Chazelle has any less of an ego than Prince. He just doesn't have equal talent. And he's not working with anybody whose talent is comparable to the cast of Sign of the Times, unfortunately. So, if we want to do a little, digression into bashing La La Land, I'm all for it.
Oh, man, screw that movie,
because I think it's a disgrace of the movie musical tradition. And it can only be appreciated, or rather, it can only be enjoyed by folks who know nothing about the great movie musical tradition. Prince was not of the generation that grew up watching MGM musicals of the 40s and 50s, but he knew enough about pop culture to like Michael Jackson, to look back into that history, to study it, and to appreciate it, and to hold those standards when he embarked on his own work. And I think that's one of the main problems for me. That's one of the main problems with La La Land, is as if Damien Chazelle, who professes to be a student and lover of film history, seems to know nothing about what the standards were of film history.
Exactly. I feel like there's a difference between embracing and digesting, the way that I feel like Prince did. Like, he would love something, he would make it his own, though. He would like put it inside of himself, and then it might come out in a form you couldn't even recognize it. But
Sure.
Damien Chazelle, I feel like, makes these films where he just references a thing very obviously. He's like, oh, look, it's balloons like in Funny Face. And then you're supposed to feel smart that you recognize the reference. And that's it. Like, he's just making a reference, but he doesn't incorporate it into who he is as an artist.
Yeah, it's not fun. It's not enjoyable. I remember that sort of reminds me of a line that was used way back in '94 when Pulp Fiction came out, a line that was used to promote Quentin Tarantino. Some reviewer said that he knows the conventions of the French New Wave. And I thought, well, that sounds good. But when you actually watch Pulp Fiction, you should realize that Quentin Tarantino doesn't know the convictions that were behind the conventions of the French New Wave. He doesn't understand that the French New Wave was reinterpreting and revising classic Hollywood genres in order to explore morality, in order to explore the human condition, in order to explore existential ideas about the meaning of existence. Tarantino just does it for just for the cheap thrills, for the violence, and for the anarchy and bad assness of it. And I think Damien Chazelle is kind of similar. He emulates movie musicals because he likes the color, he likes the idea of dance, he likes the idea of song. Oddly enough, he doesn't know what good music is, and he doesn't require his performers to be able to sing or to be able to dance well. He may think he knows the conventions, but he's miles away from the convictions of MGM musicals, and particularly also back to the French New Wave of the Jacques Demy musicals of the 1960s. He references these things, but he disgraces them at the same time. I don't want to bash a dumb film nerd because they're human beings too, but so maybe it's safer just to stay on the on the idea that Damien Chazelle simply lacks the talent to pull off a movie musical. It can't be an easy thing to do. Prince, being a hard worker, just like James Brown was, worked really hard at like Michael Jackson. They worked very hard at achieving that what's called the Fred Astaire illusion of ease. It looks like they're having fun inside of the Times, but they're working. but they're working in a way that's beautiful to behold because they're accomplished musicians. These are really talented people. They're not folks who are pretending.
Exactly. They're so talented that towards the end of the film, Prince can give Sheila E. the mic and he can go to drums. Like, he can just take places of everything. And you're like, how are you still even breathing? Like, you just did that crazy Russian dance on the floor. I don't know how you have any energy left, but you are that much of a musician that you can pick up somebody else's instrument.
Yes. And then Sheila E. takes over the mic and raps, and she walks and she struts across the front of the stage in that one-legged outfit, which is just stunning. Apparently from the old showbiz days and vaudeville days, there was that phrase, "Bring on the dancing girls." There's a reason, because it's it's a sign of life, frankly, and it's just great to behold.
All right, so let's talk about my pick, and then we're going to start pitting them against each other. You ready?
Okay.
So my pick for my favorite concert movie of all time is The Talking Heads' Stop Making Sense. Directed by Jonathan Demme in 1984. It came out 3 years before Sign of the Times, and I was wondering in the back of my head, watching them side by side, how much Prince was thinking about this film when he was making it, when he was making his own concert film about what he wanted to do or not do or how he wanted to do it differently. Because Stop Making Sense was also like a very huge art house hit. He had to be aware of it and what he wanted to do with a concert film that would be its own beast. Because I can't think of two concert films that on first look seem to be that different. Because when I think of Prince's film, when I think of Sign of the Times, I think of dramatic colors and crazy lighting and edits that show you things you can't see in a film. Like if you were at a Prince concert, you couldn't see like rose petals rewinding backwards and like raising up to the ceiling. Whereas Stop Making Sense to me feels like a really bold, deadpan look at how a concert gets put together, sort of. But, the film starts off with you just seeing an absolutely naked set. You're seeing, like, ladders and chairs and folding tables, a mismatch of ugly colors. It's not even set designed to look like a pretty backstage. It is just literally an ugly backstage. And your first glimpse of a concert film here is David Byrne, his shadow coming out, and him putting down, like, the one thing I think you're not expecting to see at a live concert, which is a boombox, and then just hitting play and doing this minimal, purist, stripped-down version of Psycho Killer that I think I don't know about you, but I think I like his Psycho Killer better than the radio version.
Okay.
And then what you see as the film goes on is you see in the first 5 or 6 numbers, the band members come out one at a time, and the sets start to build until it looks more like the normal concert film that you're expecting. But it's all there are a lot of like long takes in here. There's, I forget which number it is, maybe Once in a Lifetime, that like you almost never even cut away from Byrne. He's just there the whole time performing the number. And it's this, both films I feel like are centered on this idea of here is a person with so much stage presence and charisma that this film is endlessly watchable just by staring at David Byrne's face. And yet, I can't think of two people with more different stage charisma, honestly. You know, like I feel like Prince is all hot and sex and heat and sweat, and he's like looking around the audience and he's like making eye contact, it feels like, with people. Like he's very aware that he's performing for them. And there's something about David Byrne where I feel like his eyes are open and he doesn't even blink, but he's not seeing anybody in the crowd. He's just doing his thing, and we're lucky enough to be there watching.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, you know, we got in David Byrne and Prince, we have two opposite-seeming pop artists. You have I guess what you could call the black sensualist, and then you have the white intellectual. And the funny thing, the wonderful thing, is that that's not all either man is. They actually cross over, frankly. David Byrne's music and his performing style is actually about sex. Prince's performing style and his music is also the result of contemplation about religion, about morality, about personhood. They're both intellectuals. They just have different approaches to it.
Wait. I totally believe you about Prince being an intellectual, but David Byrne being about sex.
Yeah, well, David Byrne has a different approach to expressing his sexuality because he comes from a European white art tradition where generally sex is expressed through neuroses rather than through physical exertion and expression. And the songs of Talking Heads, the songs throughout the movie Stop Making Sense are performed in a neurotic fashion. But just because they're performed in a neurotic fashion doesn't mean they're not about sex. That's where his neurosis. That's what his neurosis is. It's a sign of him attempting to deal with his sexuality.
I literally cannot imagine any girl knocking backstage after Talking Heads concert and being like, "Hey, baby."
Oh, you haven't been to a Talking Heads concert? I think David Byrne was not a monk. But
what, really?
Oh. Yeah, well, listen. It's Talking Heads music. It's egghead music. It's music that is obsessed with the idea of how to function, in a natural world, in a world of wildness, in a world with potential chaos around the corner all the time. It's a world. His songs are about how you deal with romantic feeling, how you deal with sexual feeling, and it's a cultural thing. Frankly, it's there, and it's part of. I say it's part of the richness of Talking Heads music. There's sex there. There's sex there. It just comes out in a different fashion because people express themselves in different ways. Different cultures express different cultures have different mating rituals, different courtship rituals, and that's always what movie musicals are about, really. That's what a lot of pop music is about. They're generally courtship songs, romantic songs.
Okay, maybe I believe you for taking the idea that David Byrne is from a culture of one person. Because I feel like he's this alien from another planet who landed onto this stage. And maybe like back home over the laser beams, people on his home planet are like, oh, he's doing such a great job. Although, actually, okay, you know what, to be fair, I love Planet Earth and I love nature documentaries. Mm-hmm. And there is something when he starts moving his head like a chicken where I can imagine him being in the Brazilian rainforests on a branch being like, hey, baby, pay attention to me. I mean, there are actually even birds that like flip up their feathers to look bigger than they are. And that's kind of like the big suit.
Okay, but I'm going to insist that David Byrne is all too human. But he dares to show the certain aspects of human behavior that people are not accustomed to accepting as human, or certainly not accustomed to accepting as normal. And because a lot of his performance style has to do with neuroses has to do with the human being's response to the things that confuse them in life, that makes them into nerds, that makes them sometimes seem to behave robotically or without emotion. But what's beautiful about Talking Heads is that they're always going for emotion. That's the ultimate humanizing quality of Talking Heads as art. That it's always in the end about feeling. It's always in the end about human connection. I think that's the point of David Byrne coming out alone. He's the band leader and the originator of the band, of course. But what he needs is community. What he needs is a connection with other people, and that connection it has to have a sensual quality to it, even if it isn't exactly fornication and kissing. But those drives are expressed in the music and in certain of the movement that the dancing represents in the film.
I mean, what I like about his dancing is, and I've talked about this a little bit before in an earlier episode here, my favorite musical of all time is Pennies from Heaven by Steve Martin. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I love so much about that musical is that Steve Martin is a good dancer, but he's not a great dancer. He's not a Prince level dancer. He's more of a David Byrne level dancer. And where he's got the energy and the will to do it, but the ankles might be a little floppy, the knees are a little like loose, and somehow the rawness of the movement when it isn't perfect makes me love it even more. It's this idea that I want to do that too. Like, and I'm not a good dancer, but they make it okay because there's so much like energy and passion behind it that the music wills these movements out of the body, even if the person doing it isn't a superhuman splits doing gymnast like Prince or James Brown before him.
Well, it's interesting you bring up Steve Martin. If you look at the kind of dancing that Steve Martin does in Pennies from Heaven, and you compare it to whatever that is that Emma Stone and Ryan Gosling do in La La Land, I think you're better able then to appreciate Steve Martin's skill as a dancer. He actually knows how to dance. He's in Fred Astaire, but he knows what movements to make, and he's more of a traditional dancer certainly than David Byrne is. David Byrne does something different, and I want to say that one of the things that's most interesting for me about Sign of the Times is that even though Talking Heads are a pop group, they come from a different pop music tradition than Prince. That being, they come out of the art rock movement, which is a musical movement that has very much to do with a cerebral approach to entertainment, making songs and making art that you have to think about, making conceptual art all the time, not just making party music, though Talking Heads were certainly capable of great rhythmic tracks, but making songs and music that you have to think about, presenting concepts to the audience that they have to think about. And so I'm back to the idea that one of the concepts that David Byrne is presenting is the concept of human sexuality as evident in people who think, and people who have frustrations, and people who have neurotic anxieties. And so he dances that out, and he has to originate a lot of those dances, but he doesn't totally originate all of them. I want to talk about the big suit. Because there's the idea that the big white suit that David Byrne wears is a reference to the German artist Joseph Beuys, and that's probably very likely since David Byrne went to the Rhode Island School of Design, and he certainly knows something about modern art. But I think he isn't simply stuck in that world. That big white suit actually comes from the history of 50s R&B. It comes from Big Joe Turner, who wore big white suits when he performed. I think this is not just a coincidence. I think it's something that David Byrne knows, particularly when you think about how much his compositions for Talking Heads take from rhythm and blues. Think about it that way. It can be both, I guess. It can be Joseph Beuys as well as Big Joe Turner.
I always thought it came out of like
Japanese. That only makes the big white suit more wonderful than just an art thing. It's a sensual thing.
I always felt it came like out of Japanese theater, out of the stylization of like no theater.
Yes, it's been compared to no theater as well.
Although David Byrne himself actually joked a couple of years ago that that's still the number one question he gets, and that on his tombstone it's going to say, "Here lies David Byrne. Why the big suit?"
Yeah.
So maybe he loves the question mark of it. I mean, one of the things I think that I love about Stop Making Sense is he doesn't really talk between songs. Like Prince doesn't talk that much between songs, but you hear him like doing a call and response a little bit with the audience. Like he leaves pauses for them to sing a line, and you're aware of the audience. I think in my memory, the only thing that you hear David Byrne say in between songs and Stop Making Sense is he just goes, "Does anybody have any questions?"
Any questions? Yeah. Yeah.
And then he just charges forward because we clearly have a ton of questions. I think it's interesting that we both look at him and see such different things because to me, in that moment in Stop Making Sense, after he comes out with the big suit, but then he takes off the big suit jacket and it's just him and the big suit pants, which I find so ridiculous looking. You see his arm hair for the first time, and something about seeing his arm hair always jolts me because it makes him look more human than the person I've been seeing this whole time. Because I guess I think of him as superhuman or outer space human and not human. And then to see something that fleshy always takes me back, because to me, he looks fleshless. He looks like strange and alien and white, and I can't take my eyes off of him. The 80s is just such an interesting point for rock stars. I wish we have rock stars like this today and I just don't care. But, to contrast him and say like David Lee Roth, who was also touring in 1984, and like the different types of like heat and flesh and sweat that they had, it just seems like it would be so exciting to be a concert goer that year and get to see this range of music.
Well, sure. The 80s were a wonderful period for pop music, probably the last great decade of pop music. And there are many reasons for that. But I would like to talk a bit about how the great creativity in pop culture of the 1980s, how it influenced Stop Making Sense as well as Sign of the Times. The concept of Stop Making Sense seems to me, since we're dealing with an art rock performance group whose specialty was conceptual art, is to do that thing that was very, very fashionable to do in the 1980s, which is to deconstruct. To deconstruct, I think since Stop Making Sense is purposely a deconstruction of the traditional concert film. That's why we see the bare bones of the stage. That's why it starts out one performer and then adds on several different performers until the complete illusion of a group is achieved. The whole idea is to deconstruct what the concert performance is, what music making is, what show business is. And I think certainly in 1980s terms, I think the audience were familiar with artists who did this. And so that's what David Byrne and Jonathan Demme do. It's also what Prince does in his way, because at the same time that Sign of the Times looks like a concert film, there are narratives in it. There are short stories in it with each song. And one of the marvelous things about that movie is that it's able to shift into different songs, different narratives, different stories, even a mini movie called You Got the Look. And it does that without disturbing the audience's sense of following a narrative, because the audience is up for it by the 1980s. They're used to making these fast shifts between one kind of storytelling and another. And just as while watching Stop Making Sense, I think David Byrne and Jonathan Demme understand that their audience, they don't need all of the narrative illusions that traditional movie musicals would offer. They're able to make emotional connections to the songs and the performances in their own way, because it's all deconstructed, and you're watching the deconstruction of a concert film, and you don't mind. You simply invest yourself in the passion of the performance, and also in what the songs and the performances reflect about human experience, about social experience. And particularly for me, the fascinating thing about Stop Making Sense is that it's very much about some of the same ideas that there are in Sign of the Times. It's about race, and I'm going to insist, Amy, that it's about sex, but it's about racial relationships, largely about the cultural confluence of black and white cultures. That's certainly the color scheme of Stop Making Sense, and it's about how David Byrne comes from both art rock, an appreciation for art rock, British art rock, and also an appreciation for American rhythm and blues,
Yeah,
and
I mean,
how black and white cultures combined, and it's one of the marvelous things about the movie because it's so evident, it's so obvious visually, but it's felt in the performances and in every song.
yeah, like I mean, it's
And the
interesting,
same,
like knowing a little bit of the history of the band Talking Heads and how they broke up fairly soon after this. I mean, I think recently when somebody asked David Byrne if the band is still in contact, he's like, "Oh yeah, totally. I talk to them all the time through my lawyers, of course." You know, like in that he really split up with, you know, the main core of the band fairly soon after this. And that
right.
when he's on stage with them, you know, you don't see that much charisma, I feel like, between like him and like say Weymouth, for example, when she comes out. But you feel that charisma between him and the backup dancers or the singers, you know, between like him and Lynn Mabry and Edna Holt. Like he seems to come alive when they're dancing together in a way that he doesn't come alive with anybody in his actual band.
Sure, they were ready to break up, and I don't mind that they did because I think they sort of reached a creative limit together, and that's fine.
Yeah. I mean, and I like
But
the
you know,
Tom Tom Club, but I think it's funny that when the Tom Tom Club gets to come out and perform Genius of Love, he just takes
mhm.
off. He's like, "Oh, this is the song that you guys like. I don't want anything to do with this. I'm going to go put my suit on. This has nothing to do with me. I want to make it clear."
Which is too bad because Genius of Love has a charm that David Byrne lacks, frankly. Though not as performed in that film. Actually, I was never satisfied with the performance of Genius of Love in the film, but it's such a sweet and charming song
It
on its
is.
own. You know, I don't think David Byrne has ever been able to achieve that kind of insouciance or just simply that kind of charm. He perhaps seems to work too hard
Yeah, and actually,
to do that.
now
But
thinking
they
about
have
it, we
it.
get like a
But
subliminal James Brown in both of these concert films. We get
yeah.
actual James Brown being chanted here, which is so weird to hear them say James Brown live. I just like to think of that as like a recorded loop in the song. And then we
Hmm.
get everything from Prince that's just flagrantly showing who James Brown meant to him, like how much he meant to him as a performer.
Yeah. Uh, uh, but you know, my favorite moment in Stop Making Sense though is the performance of the song "What a Day That Was," and I'm always struck at how while everyone on stage is jamming to the song, there are certain points where Jonathan Demme cuts to shots of Tina Weymouth, and she's into it. She may not be into David Byrne anymore, but she's into the music that he's set out for them to play, and everybody on stage is grooving, to use an R&B term, uh, and that's beautiful to see, frankly. Um, you know, I don't mind that they eventually broke up because I personally as a Talking Heads fan, I thought they had peaked several years before the movie was made. And for me, they peaked with the Remain in Light album in 1980, and I never found any of the music they made afterwards nearly so satisfying or nearly so thrilling either. But they continue to perform for years, and the movie Sign of the Times is, you know, it's a terrific thing. But I'm okay with them breaking up. But I particularly I do love that moment of What a Day That Was, which I think is also presents the viewer with a kind of mini movie in itself. It's almost like a film noir because it's mostly in shadows. It has this kind of expressionist chiaroscuro visual style to it.
Yeah,
I guess
and
from Demme and the photographer Jordan Cronenweth,
who
where a lot of
did
times just
Blade Runner?
some facial features poking out of shadows, and
Mainly
it's
noses.
very. Pardon me.
Yeah, it's mainly like noses even. It's not trying to be like attractive horror movie lighting. It's like monstrous lighting. It's like here, Tina, this is just Tina's nose glowing in mid screen, and it's like so distancing, but really you don't see that. You don't see that.
But you also have moments though when she's whipping her hair, her blonde hair. That's I get yes. It's largely just protuberant features that you see poking in out of the shadows into a little bit of light. But but the spookiness of the design of the dark, what I call film noir motif of that moment is really a fascinating thing. Particularly when you think about what everybody's singing and playing about in that song, which goes back to the neurotic search for meaning in a chaotic and threatening world.
Yeah, I mean, like
it's a wonderful moment.
Yeah, we touched on that idea of like deconstruction earlier, and I feel like there's so much active deconstruction in this, even that when the words start popping up on the screen behind them, at very first, the words that they're even popping up don't make any sense at all. It's like video game, facelift, sandwich, babies, dust balls. And only as the song goes on do they even start combining into sentences, like before dinner time, before you're awake. But then Jonathan Demme doesn't let them even finish the thought. He just kind of cuts away from the screens and you don't see what happened after that.
Yeah.
Also, like,
80s.
we should say, by the way, like, oh, sorry. We should also say, like, Jonathan Demme really just saw the Talking Heads live and loved them and asked if he could film them. And he, kind of like how Sign of the Times is so much Prince's vision, this is also really the Talking Heads vision more than the director coming in.
Yes and no. I would say yes and no, because I think all the ideas, particularly the cultural ideas, the racial ideas that I see in Stop Making Sense, are very much Jonathan Demme ideas. He is one of those Mr. Multicultis from the 1980s, in movies like the Melanie Griffith film, Something Wild.
Yeah.
In movies like Something Wild, particularly, Jonathan Demme is fascinated at the idea of the intersection of ethnicity and race in America. I think he's very much into what the underlying themes of Talking Heads songs are about. Being an American pop group, I think they take the art rock idea from Britain and they apply it to the number one American anxiety, which is anxiety about race. And that's Jonathan Demme that's Jonathan Demme at his best in films like Something Wild and Rachel Getting Married and of course Beloved. It's Jonathan Demme. I don't think.
But Jonathan Demme didn't make them.
At, True Stories, David Byrne couldn't do this on his own.
Oh, but Jonathan Demme wouldn't have made him pick out his singers that he's already picking out. And it was David Byrne who, I think Edna, one of the singers, she's the one who gets like the subplot in 20 Feet from Stardom. Like the day before they started shooting Stop Making Sense, she changed her hair and got it short. And David Byrne freaked out and sent her to the hairdresser that day to go get a weave back in so she could whip her hair around.
Right. Oh, it's of course, it's a collaboration, but I'm saying these are Jonathan Demme's own themes. These are themes that he's always working with, and there is a high level of film craft in this movie that only Jonathan Demme could have brought it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things to start like really comparing the craft of how they assemble these two films, is that with Jonathan Demme, you don't really see the audience of Stop Making Sense until the very end, when you get a couple like close-ups of interesting people, including, and Pauline Kael made fun of this one, and I kind of don't like it either, when you see the little kid holding the white unicorn stuffed animal, you're sort of like, okay. But you get to see all these interesting people loving this show who are all very, very different from each other, but only at the end. Mm-hmm. Whereas I feel like you're so much more aware of the crowd the whole time that you're watching Sign of the Times, to the point that they have the camera in the crowd, where you see like hands and fists pumping in the air ahead of you. But the crowd is more of just a crowd and not a series of individuals. Like Demme rarely shows them, makes them individuals. Prince makes them just a mass of people who are there participating in the moment.
Yeah, okay, yes. I've never thought that the crowd shots were very significant to either film, frankly. I think there's so much energy on stage that's really the focus of the film, of each film, and why I say that both of them are part of an important cultural development in the 1980s, where Hollywood no longer is able to make the same kind of movie musicals it once did. The Hollywood movie musical was dead by the 1970s, virtually. But pop music is not dead. Pop music keeps going. Pop music has a new flourish in the 1980s. And all of a sudden, we come up with a different kind of movie musical, but it's a movie musical that's largely based on certain conventions of popular music, of rock and roll music, which in the 1980s happens to be music video conventions.
Yeah, well, the thing that we haven't said.
There are two kinds of music videos. There's the performance music video, and then there's the conceptual music video. And these two movies show it the same way, by the way, in 1980s, you had the Pet Shop Boys film, It Couldn't Happen Here. And you have, I think, equally important, the Laurie Anderson film, Home of the Brave. And, Laurie Anderson being another one of those art rock people who believes in deconstructing everything. And Jonathan Demme and David Byrne are part of the same pop art movement that Laurie Anderson is. And all that is reflected in the style, I think, of Stop Making Sense, but also in its own way in the style of Sign of the Times. Remember how Sign of the Times opens with the cast on stage, not with the audience, but with the cast on stage pretending to be characters, and each one of them speaks a theme. They say love, sex, fun, happiness, joy, whatever. But they announce their themes very much the way that the words pop up on the wall in Stop Making Sense and in Laurie Anderson's Home of the Brave. The themes are announced, and then the songs play out these themes. It's part of the way that the old-fashioned movie musical narrative is deconstructed in the 1980s to fit a concert movie format. But neither Stop Making Sense nor Sign of the Times is very much like the traditional rock concert films such as Woodstock or Wattstax or Medicine Ball Caravan or any of those.
Yeah, or even something like The Last Waltz, which had the narrative of saying goodbye. There's not a narrative of saying goodbye to the band. It's both just celebration of the band. And I like that we made it actually this far into the episode without even referencing my employer, MTV, for shape-shifting the way that we associated music and images, at this moment. Like, to me, of the two, Sign of the Times feels the most, like, directly inspired by the videos you would see on MTV, by the editing and by the colors, right. and by the surreality. But they were, you're right, I like that idea of thinking about how MTV triggered the shift in what a movie musical could be. Mm-hmm. So on this note, I think this is where we have to start really doing the pros and cons of which one of these should be in the canon as the 80s concert dog.
Well, I'm not going to fight over it. They both must be in the canon. This is one of those things where both are deserving.
They are both deserving.
We could argue our personal preference, but we've already stated those. But they're both deserving, and especially in a world of La La Land. Both deserving.
But here's the problem. We don't really get to decide. We can only make the case, and it is the listeners of the canon who get to vote on which one of these goes in. Okay,
they can vote. But most importantly, they need to see both of them and see them with some sensitivity and some erudition. After all, both movies are based on popular music, and popular music has a more direct. I argue that popular music has a more direct impact on people than movies do. Frankly, we live with music more than we live with movies, even though movies are very important to my cultural life. But I think that's a fact. Music goes directly to the soul. So this is pop music we're talking about, and these are the two best pop music movies there are. There's got to be, if there's room for one, there's got to be room for the other.
It's so tough. I mean, like, honestly, thinking...
But just to finish the idea.
Yeah.
There's room for one, there's got to be room for the other. There is no room for La La Land.
There is no room for La La Land. There will never be room for La La Land in the canon.
Never.
Never, ever, 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 ever. We did get Pennies from Heaven in the canon, narrowly, but it meant a lot to me.
Yeah, maybe so. That's to be argued later.
Oh, it was argued, and it has been determined. It is in. It is in. It is in.
I don't mind it.
But here it's tough. Like, I was surprised to find myself realizing how many parallels I really found between David Byrne and Prince when I watched these movies. Even though there's like little things that couldn't be more radically different. You know, the way that Prince is like showering love on everybody on his stage. When there's that moment in Stop Making Sense when David Byrne is like, and now I'm going to introduce the band by name. Like he specifies by name, like as though maybe there was a chance he couldn't do it by name. Maybe he'd forget. I'm always worried he will forget who he's introducing even as he's doing it, because the connections just seem to be different. What I almost like about Stop Making Sense is it kind of seems to function to me like a beautiful machine. Like you love music, and here's how your music gets constructed, and it's all of these very, very different people coming together to do this one thing. Maybe like an ideal version of a democracy. I don't really know. And there's not... I could never imagine David Byrne on that set, because I'm just putting my foot down on the David Byrne is sexy thing. But like I could never imagine him on that set flirting
sexy.
with...
I'm sorry.
Oh,
Go ahead.
yeah. Like the way his relationship to the dancers, I love, I think, how childish and almost innocent it is that they like have a relationship based on like jumping up and down together, where you can't imagine him like touching them or like ripping their skirt off with his teeth the way that Prince would ever do. But there's a connection there all the same. You know, just this very different idea of connection of like two people connecting over their joy of the thing that they are creating together. And I love the innocence of that so much.
Well, sexy is not the same as sexual.
True, I think.
Even Frankenstein had a bride. David Byrne's dealing with sex. I put my foot down on that. He's dealing with sex just in that strange way.
Well, maybe you know some gossip about David Byrne that I don't know.
Huh?
Maybe you know
Pardon?
Gossip about David Byrne that I don't know.
No, it's not. No, it's something I know about the artist, about the artist's ideas. In fact, when Talking Heads broke up and David Byrne went solo, I believe his first solo album was Ray Momo, Reimomo, and there are two songs on Ray Momo. One is Independence Day, and the other is Make Believe Mambo. And both of these songs are about about sexual fantasy, about trying to become your own sexual idea, and how your own sexual idea goes against certain social roles that are imposed upon human beings. These are the things that every artist is dealing with all the time, frankly, if they're a good artist and if they're an honest artist. And I'm insisting to you that it's there in Talking Heads music all the time. And it's just performed in an odd way in Sign of the Times. But David Byrne is very much concerned with he has his own sexual conflicts, as we all do. And being a good and honest artist, he expresses it. But in Sign of the Times, he's playing with those notions too. He's playing with them. That's one thing that rock artists did. They play with these notions and don't make them so obvious. But it's there. Gosh, if they're not dealing with sexuality and spirituality, then what else do you got? Those are the two things that make us human. It's there.
You know what? All right, I am picturing him dancing with that lamp, and picturing David Byrne and the joy on his face dancing with a lamp, who I think is his favorite dance partner or partner in the whole film.
Mm-hmm.
There's just different versions of romance. And
Sure.
I think that is as romantic of a movie musical moment as anything. I would rather watch David Byrne dance with that lamp than Ryan Gosling dance with Emma Stone.
Absolutely, absolutely. But listen, during the Singing in the Rain number, Gene Kelly doesn't have a dancing partner, but except the one that's in his head.
Yeah.
And he's dancing with a lamppost.
They're both dancing with stiff, upright things.
Sure.
That illuminate.
Okay, there you go. You run with that where you want to run to, but there you go. It's there. It's there. Sometimes a lamp is not just a lamp.
Well, Armond, this has been so fun. I'm really glad that you could come on and talk about this, even if this is weirdly the most peaceful episode of the canon I've ever recorded, where we both like both things. And I guess we're just bunting and leaving it to the viewers because I adore both of these films as well. So it's a little scary. I feel like letting go of this and saying, as the universe wills it, so shall it be done. But both of these films are fantastic. So for listeners out there, we're going to, on our forum, put up a tab on our forum for the episode with a poll where you can vote for Stop Making Sense or for Sign of the Times, and leave your argument for either one beneath at the bottom. And Armond, will you tell everybody where to find you and how to read your fantastic Prince book and every other thing you'd like them to know?
Okay, I am weekly on the National Review website, and I'm also weekly on the Out Magazine website. My book on Prince is called New Position. That's titled after the second track of the Parade album, which I know Amy is going to listen to as soon as possible.
I will on the way home.
The book is titled New Position after the second track because, the first track is Christopher Tracy's Parade, which is an odd march-like introduction. The second track is the hook. And after the second track, you will be into Parade, I promise you. So the book is called New Position because it's about how Prince shifted from being a great musician to being a maker of great films to being the auteur of many great music videos. And it's available at Amazon.com.
Fantastic. Well, Armond, thank you again for joining us. As always, I'm Amy Nicholson. I'm with MTV News, and you can find me there on Twitter at the Amy Nicholson. What's your Twitter again? It's
3X chair.
3X chair.
3X chair.
What does that mean?
Oh, I was the chairman of the New York Film Critics Circle 3 times, the only person who's ever been.
Oh, that would be nice. I'm treasurer of the LA Film Critics, but I'm not that good at it.
Treasurer?
Yeah.
I don't know. There's money in this stuff?
I got a lot of checks I got to deposit. Do not tell the president.
Okay.
All right.